I encourage everyone to take a moment and breathe and take a tea cheers with a Jiri tea. A Jiri tea recognizes the beauty in shared stories and shared opportunities. Ajiri sources award-winning tea from Kenya, employs women in the region to handcraft the labels, and sends 100% of the profits back to the region to support orphan education. Save 10% on your order of Kenyan teas and coffee with the code BeautifullyHuman at ajiritea.com. AJIRIT.com. Tea mugs up. Hello, and welcome to the Beautifully Human podcast. I'm Nick Sheesby. In this podcast, I speak with beautiful humans from all around the world, sharing with you their incredible stories, revealing the power in every human story, to spread love and humanity to a world that is in desperate need of it, to show that we can all connect in beautiful ways no matter where we come from or what we look like. What you will find out is that we are all beautifully human. Let's all be beautifully human. Thank you, everybody, for checking out the Beautifully Human podcast. My name is Nick Sheesby, and today I am chatting with an amazing person, good friend, overall beautiful human, Brian Marquis. And man, he shares his journey through life, and it is pretty incredible. So I truly hope you enjoy this. And if you would, go to Apple Podcasts, give me a review and a rating. Those things do help. Follow on Spotify so you get notified when new episodes come out. And just enjoy this amazing episode. Well, I'm excited to have this conversation with you, dude. I mean, it's been fun getting to know you. I met you this summer in Idaho. What was the city again?
Well, we were in Kingston, technically, on the river, on the
Okay.
Coeur d'Alene River, close to Kellogg, Idaho.
Man, it was so awesome. It was funny because I had heard from all our friends here in Nashville. I'd heard about you, and then we'd been on Zoom calls, and then we just showed up and we floated the river and we jumped in the water, and it was icy cold, and man, it was just such a good time. So I've really enjoyed getting to know you. And now that you're in Nashville, getting to see you safely at fires has been really cool. But I'm excited to get to know you and have a purposeful conversation.
Yeah, likewise. When you said seeing you at fires, it sounds like we're both like volunteer firemen that just like hang out at fires. Hey, there you are, Nick. Yeah, what's good?
Hey, man,
Just
nice.
just
You got a nice hose,
just
Brian.
here by this
You look
fire.
good. Maybe that's what we're destined for. Maybe that's what these times are telling us.
Maybe
That that's
maybe it,
our.
maybe it's a metaphor. Yeah.
um. So open ended. Just tell me about life, man. Growing up, all that good stuff. Let's talk. Let's hear about Brian.
Oh boy, go back to the beginning.
Yeah.
Hmm. Well, I grew up in Connecticut to my parents, Gail and Kevin, and some of my first memories were um, I lived in this I lived in this farmhouse in Bethany, Connecticut. Those are some of my first memories of being a kid. It's like a little quiet kind of country town, but real close to New Haven, Connecticut, which is a pretty
Hmm.
pretty large city in Connecticut, and has Yale is there, and a bunch of different schools and hospitals and things. So, but I grew up, as far as I could tell, in the country, and in a big farmhouse. And I didn't know any of the logistics or any of the details, or could understand them as a child. But what I later learned in life was that we were living with another family, the Calhouns. And the Calhouns were, I believe they were professors at Yale. They were both professors at Yale. And the story goes is my parents had me pretty young. They were in their early 20s. I think my mom was 21 or 20, and my dad not much older than that either. And they were kind of broke and young, and just trying to get on their feet. So they needed a place to stay. They couldn't really afford a house at the time. So times were kind of tough, I guess was what was happening. And a family friend offered for us to live with them. So here I was, a fresh little 1-2 year old growing up in this farmhouse. And yeah, and it was interesting because as far as I knew, these people were my family. I couldn't differentiate, what they were or who they were. And what was cool is that I remember my earliest memories where there was this very old woman named, I think I just called her Nanny, but it was Mrs. Calhoun. She was the mother of, I don't remember which one she was the mother of, but she was living with them, this very old woman. And I think that's how the connection was. My mom was caretaking for her. She was kind of in her later years and not doing too well. So mom was taking care of her. And I just remember that I just thought this old person, everybody that's an old person was a grandma or grandpa to you. So
Sure,
she
yeah.
she was Granny. And I remember she gave me this book, Where the Wild Things Are by Maurice Sendak, which became like one of my favorite books of all time. It's an incredible coming of age imagination story of a young boy who creates his own worlds. And I don't remember, I think it was David and Luva Calhoun. I don't remember them too much other than David had a really big gray beard. And there was another family that lived there. I believe the woman's name was Tanaka. And I don't remember if they were Korean or Japanese, but they lived there with us as well. And I thought they were my family too.
Yeah.
And there was other people that would come and go that were family members of the Calhouns. There was I remember a nephew who was also a musician. He was a folk musician. He would come by and play once in a while. And it was really cool. Like I lived on this farmhouse, which to me was massive. It felt massive, and I had this big yard with a water tower in the woods and a barn that was terrifying. And there was rabbits, in the fields and stuff. And it was just such a magical place to grow up and explore. And there was a peach tree orchard across the street that was the Calhouns. So I remember being a young kid on my dad's shoulders, picking peaches off the trees. And they were so good. And yeah, I remember picking onion grass and selling onion grass and rocks on the side of the road to people passing by. It's one of my first entrepreneurial ventures.
Yeah.
And yeah, we'd eat dinner at this big long oak table that looked like royalty. Like it looked like this big king's table, big and old, and everybody just ate together. And we were always with a bunch of people. And it was kind of like my first understanding of family. Even though these people weren't my blood family, it was just people caring about each other and people living together. And there was something really special about that. And I remember, one of my first moments of understanding music and people coming together around music was Hurricane Gloria was happening, or gonna happen. It was a big hurricane coming our way. I remember my mom told me, go grab your toys and put them against the house so the hurricane doesn't take them away, which I didn't really comprehend, but I listened and I went and grabbed all my toys and we hunkered down inside, and the power went out. We were eventually all around the fire. And then my dad, and I think his name was Jim Calhoun, he was the nephew who was a folk musician. He started playing guitar and my dad started playing guitar, and they just started playing songs, John Denver, James Taylor, Joni Mitchell, Carole King, like all, Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young, Van Morrison, like all these like 60s, 70s singer-songwriter music, folky stuff. And that's, I think, like my first solid memory of music, and all sitting around, literally around a fire with the power out. And it was just cool and beautiful. And that was all I knew. And I had a cat. Well, it wasn't my cat, it was their cat. Cat's name was Hannibal, which I didn't understand until many, many years
Sure.
later. But the cat's name
It's
was
fantastic.
Hannibal. Hannibal was a big, big fucker. It was this huge gray cat, and remind me of the cat in Pet Cemetery when I saw that later in life.
Yeah.
And this cat was just always getting into trouble and always fighting other animals and hunting. Like, it always had blood on its paws, and the fur on its like bottom half of its body just had,
It's fitting.
yeah, just dirt and blood. Yeah. So they called him Hannibal for a reason. Well, Hannibal and I used to be in the basement, and I would hunt mice with Hannibal, and I would help Hannibal by like putting boxes around a mouse in a corner, and then I would literally take Hannibal and just hurl him at the mice. And this, like, in my mind, the cat's just like
Yeah.
just
Yeah.
pounce on it, just rip it apart. Really, I was just throwing a cat, and the cat was like, "What are you doing?" But
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
I'd like to,
Exactly.
I'd like to think we were on the same team.
Totally.
Um, yeah, and that was Hannibal, and yeah, it was just a really cool place to grow up. And I remember a brook nearby where I pretend to go fishing with my mom, and some cheese slices. We use cheese slices for bait.
Yeah.
Uh, I remember, um, I remember I used to smash lightning bugs and then wipe it on my face, and like war paint. And
Yeah.
and to me, I would look like my whole face was glowing. But when I'd go inside, I'd just be covered in bug guts, and my mom would be like, "What are
Oh
you
God.
doing?" And
Yeah.
I'm like, I got the paint on me. I looked like I was glowing. She's like,
Right.
"You're a mess." And yeah, I remember I left the house once and just went into another house nearby, and it was this big old house across the street, and I just started wandering around, and I was looking at stuff, checking stuff out, and I remember sitting at a piano, and I was just like, boom, and I just hit all the keys as loud as I could, and this woman like freaked out, and she got startled,
Oh
and
shit.
she's like, "Oh," and I'm like, "Ah." So she took me into, I remember her taking me into the kitchen. She put me up on the counter, and she gave me a cookie, and there was this little alligator toy that just sticks in my mind that she gave me. And I heard my dad calling for me, so I ran back across the street, and I just heard him coming around the house, and I just was right right around the corner from where he was, and I just crouched down on the ground, and I just sat there. And then he comes around, and he's like, "What are you doing?" And I'm like, "I've been here the whole time." He's like, "No, you haven't. I was just here." And I'm like, "I've been right here."
Yeah.
he's like he's like, "Where'd you get that alligator?" I'm like, "I found it." And that was it.
Yeah.
Anyways, it was just like a real time of curiosity, and it was like I was really on my own. I didn't have any brothers yet. Um, and I don't remember other kids to play with there. But so I think that kicked off a good healthy amount of imagination, occupying
Yeah.
myself in that space. And funny thing is, years later, maybe when I was 18 or 19, I went back to that house. I was in the area. I was going to a hardcore show with a friend. I was like, "Oh," I was like, "Wait, Bethany." I'm like, "I think we're close to my old house." And he's like, "Well, let's go try and find it." And I just drove around aimlessly, found it immediately. I had never
Yeah.
driven to this house before, myself. So
Right.
it's 18, 19 years, or yeah, at least 15 to 18 years later. And I found the house. It looked so small compared to what my mind remembered it as.
Sure. Yeah.
But the water tower was decrepit and still in the woods. The field was still there. And I just stopped by just to say hi and see who was there. And we stopped by, and I knew nothing of the family, or if people passed on or what, or who was there. But it turned out it was like a niece or nephew of the Calhouns was living there with her family. And she's like, "Oh, this." Yeah. I told her I used to live here. She's like, "Oh, that's great, this and that." And she was really friendly. And then this big monster of a cat just comes walking outside real slow. And I'm like, is that Hannibal? And she's like, yeah, you know Hannibal? And I'm like, yeah.
Oh my
I'm
God.
like, Hannibal must have been like 20 years old.
Holy shit.
And Hannibal was
That's
just like,
amazing.
yeah, Hannibal was
Just
rugged.
savage.
And
Man.
but yeah, that was the start of my life with my parents, you know. Um, I remember those years as very good years for them too. I feel like they were broke but happy. Um,
Yeah.
my dad was like a traveling salesman doing something, and um, my mom was taking care of me, and then she was, taking care of Nanny, who eventually passed. She was also the first person to pass away, and I remember just thinking she just disappeared. Like I thought
Hmm.
that was all I could comprehend of it. But um, yeah, and then after that, we moved a bunch. I think my parents had a tough time early on getting on their feet, but they wanted to be independent. So I went from living in this awesome farmhouse with a bunch of people that I felt were family and all this room to explore. We moved into a apartment complex, and it was terrible. And I had like ants in my Cheerios, and the people there were weird and mean, and there was like a drunk guy who like smashed my pumpkins on Halloween, and I remember him apologizing to me, and I didn't understand it. I'm like, yeah, but why would you do that?
Yeah. Come on, man. That's not
And there was
cool.
a landlord that hated me, and he was so terrifying and scary. I just was like, why did we move here? Like, this apartment's
Yeah, no
small and it
kidding.
sucks, and it was rough. Um, and I started school, but we moved a couple times throughout all that, my early years. So I went to three different grade schools. I think three different grade schools, and that really that really was
Yeah, that had to be
torture.
miserable.
It's
Yeah,
miserable. Kids are brutal.
totally.
And so I had to get kind of tough. I got to get some tough skin, or become a extrovert or an introvert. It was kind of I felt like this push and pull. It's kind of like, what are you going to be? You going to fight back? You going to stand up for yourself? You going to go inward? What's it going to be? And I think I just came more of an extrovert, and attribute my mom for helping me kind of be strong through all that. And, getting picked on, and I was picked on because I was poor. I was picked on because my eyes were had a light shade of purple on my eyelids because
Hmm.
I was so pale. So
Yeah.
kids thought I was wearing makeup. Um,
Yeah.
and my mom would try and help me out. She's like, Mom, they're making fun of me because I have makeup. She's like, well, next time they ask you, they say something about your eyes and you're wearing makeup, just say, yeah, I am. Want some? And I'm like, okay. And I did that, and it did not work. And I was like, Mom, that didn't help at all. She's like, well,
Yeah.
you're fired back. And I'm like,
Right.
yeah, but now they think I wear makeup, and that's not helping me out right now. Like,
Yeah.
so I don't know. I had my childhood kind of got a little weird. I remember. So before we moved from Bethany, I did have a brother who was born when I was 4, or yeah, almost 4, almost 5. Sean is my first brother, and I have an early memory of him. Hmm, well, I remember what was happening. I knew something was wrong. Something was very wrong. My mom was upset. My dad was upset, and I remember they had to put my brother in the tub and
Hmm.
cool him off, or something was happening. Um, he was sick, and they had to call the ambulance. And I remember they had to hold his tongue out of his mouth so he didn't swallow his own tongue. I
Damn.
don't really remember what was happening now. It's been so long. But I remember the paramedics had to come, and I thought, I didn't think my brother was going to die because I didn't know what that was, but I knew something was wrong because my parents
Yeah.
were so upset. So that was a weird one. That was like one of the first moments of fear in my life. Um,
Yeah.
and so then he was born, and he was young, and then we moved to Woodbury, and then we moved to Watertown, and I'm just going through different grade schools, and then we moved from Watertown to Litchfield, Connecticut, which I spent most of my young years from third or fourth, yeah, third grade on, middle of third grade. That's brutal too.
Dude,
Just
terrible. Yeah.
coming in middle of third grade, people are like, who's this? Who's this fucking poor kid?
Who's this kid wearing makeup? What the fuck's he doing
Yeah,
here?
I was not having a good time. Um,
Man.
but I had a really good family, really good support there. Um, a big family. We always had, gatherings and parties at my grandparents' house, and but yeah, school was brutal. Get to Litchfield, which was a it was a predominantly it was a predominantly upper middle class town. So like majority of people are doing okay compared to where I came from. Um, and even the school system was so much better that when I arrived there, I was behind. So
Hmm.
I arrived there in third grade, and they basically kids were already doing multiplication and division and cursive handwriting, and I hadn't even started that yet. So when I got there, so add this. So this is my third grade school, and now not only is it my third grade school, but now they're telling me I'm behind, which translated to
Oof.
he's slow or special or needs extra help. So every day, an aide would come to the my classroom and pull me away and bring me with all the kids that had mental handicaps and disabilities and all that. And I would sit in that room and learn how to do cursive and learn how to do multiplication division. And I would just get made fun of so hard. It was just like
Sure, yeah.
every day being ushered away to, they had a terrible name for it. It was like
Yeah, oh God, I'm
it
sure.
was room 303, and I was so, it felt like punishment. It was weird. It was like, why? And I was just behind because of school system sucked from where I came from. So I did that, worked through it, and eventually not only did I catch up, but I excelled, and they put me in all like these, special high honors classes, and the superintendent hung my artwork in his office, and like all kinds of things just started kind of
Wow.
happening. And I was a good little student. Um,
Yeah.
and I wasn't an idiot. Not that any
Right.
of those people are idiots, but it was to the kids. I was like, special needs, which also doesn't help when you're trying to fit in at a
Right.
new school.
Yeah, definitely not.
And I remember kids would make fun of me for, having ripped jeans before ripped jeans were cool.
Right.
Or I had corduroys where the corduroy was worn off on the knees. And, all my
Oh
clothes
yeah.
were hand me downs. And it was just all at once. It all came down at once, like being made fun of for, how I look, being made fun of for being stupid, being made fun of because of, got poor kids' clothes, and it was just
Yeah.
brutal.
Yeah, not not anything fun to have at a new school.
No, it was pretty. I look back on it and I'm like, man, how did I how did I survive that? Because it was a mental challenge. It really, 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 really hurt my soul a bit, but it also kind of, I think, kind of made me the performer that I am. Kind of made me
Sure.
kind of come out of my shell in a different way rather than go inward. And um, I learned to stand up for myself, and I learned to not take shit, and just to ignore people, and kind of just,
Yeah.
I was lucky enough to have the support system at home and with my bigger family. And saving grace was I had a cousin that I went to school with, so he was there. Um, so I had somebody I could rely on.
Right.
And yeah, so then, yeah, just growing up in this town where felt like a poor kid on the poor side of town. We were by the train tracks, literally. Um, and yeah, I just did school. I excelled in, most subjects. I really liked writing and music, and did a lot of sports. Did sports all through all my years, and um, I was a runner and a track star. I threw javelin. I won the league championship once. I
Nice.
did cross country running. I did swimming. I went to the Junior Olympics for for running and for track.
Wow.
And
What did you run?
I was running cross country once for Junior Olympics, and then I was doing javelin for 1 year.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So
Cool.
like back then it was like 5K, 5K distance.
Yeah.
And yeah, and I just got into music, and my dad had played guitar around the house growing up. I remember blowing on the harmonica, sitting in his guitar case, when I was real little. Um, so music was always around, and my mom sang with her friends' music group, and she sang on one of his records, which was a tape cassette that I remember.
Cool.
So yeah, music was always kind of around, and my dad never played professionally, but he was always playing around the house. And I remember when I was 11, I got into guitar with my best friend at the time, Mark, and we both found my dad's guitar. I knew where it was, and I was like, it was in this case that looked like it looked kind of space age. It was made out of plastic, and it was like bubbled plastic. I think my dad even said the guitar came from space. There's
Yeah.
a long line of things my dad had told me that were not true. But
Right.
I repeated these things, guys. You do. Why would your
Yeah.
parents lie to you? So I told my
Of
friend
course.
Mark, I'm like, this guitar is from space. So I opened up the case, and it was this Washburn, real super 80s Washburn guitar in like seafoam green with a whammy bar and a Floyd Rose, which I didn't know at the time what that was, but it's just a very complicated, bridge system for, going crazy on the whammy bar. So it's basically a guitar you would see in a band like, you know, Van Halen or Poison, Warrant. It
Mm.
was a very 80s guitar. It's pretty, so it
Yeah.
made it even look space age to us, like
Sure.
something
Yeah.
funky and weird. It wasn't a Stratocaster. And we picked it up and kind of mimed playing it. And like there was something in that moment we were both like, let's play guitar. We're like, yeah.
Yeah.
So we started making music videos of us playing. Man, these are all on VHS. I don't even know if he has them anymore. He probably does. This is before you put shit on YouTube and just like
Right.
show
Right.
everyone. Like we
Yeah.
just did these for ourselves, but we'd make these music
Totally.
videos of us like in his room miming on the guitar. No straps or anything, just miming on the guitar. He had a strobe light that would be going nonstop, and we'd be jumping off the bed and doing like all to like Metallica and Ozzy Osbourne and stuff like that, Guns N' Roses, and it was so much fun. And then we're like, all right, we got to get serious. We got to learn how to play these things. So we started
Right. Yeah.
we started taking guitar lessons, and man, I took guitar lessons at this place called Mach 1 Music, which was so 80s. It was like, and this is like just around 1990, 91. And it's so 80s still. The 80s are still alive and well in this music store. Guy at the register's got a mullet and like,
Oh yeah.
those real 70s glasses. And I just remember all the gear and the guitars, and my dad was excited about it. So it's kind of like a fun thing for him to do with me.
Yeah.
And I remember taking lessons, and you'd go downstairs into the basement, and you'd find this little room with a door with a window on it that had red velvet on the walls. And then
Badass.
this guy comes down, and he's got long hair, but the sides of his head are shaved, and he's got kind of a little mohawk in the front, and the breast is like long, and he's got boots on, and he's tall and lanky, and his name's Chet. His name was Chet, and he was a rocker, and he was a
Chet
very
the
like he was a
Rocker.
very somber rocker. Like, are you ready? And I'm like, yeah, sure.
Yeah.
So I had to go sit in this tiny little soundproof room with Chet, and he's like, what do you want to learn? And I'm like, I don't know. I want to learn guitar. He's like, okay. Like just like I woke him up, like, taking less
Right.
taking
Right.
lessons, like I woke him up. And it's like, well, I want to learn Metallica. I want to learn Guns N' Roses. So like some of the first things I ever learned on guitar were um, One by Metallica, which is a typical early single string picking clean song to learn. And then he tried to teach me Sweet Child of Mine, which
Mm.
which was like the solo on that was way advanced. Could
Yeah.
not figure out what was going on, but he did the chords too. So I started taking lessons, and I don't remember them being good, but I remember I liked the music. I liked something about it. Um, but I stuck to it because I didn't know you could quit either. Like when you're young and you're just like,
Yeah,
I
yeah, yeah.
have to do this thing.
I'm a guitar player now.
Dad took me here. So
Yeah.
I remember this is funny. I'm kind of recollecting like these are the first times where like homework felt like, a thing I would disappoint this guy. He'd be like, did you practice? And I'm like, no. And he's like, all right, I'll give you something else. I'll give you something else to not learn. And eventually I started practicing, but I don't even know how long I went to lessons. I don't think very long, but I remember just not being happy with it. And this guy didn't seem happy. So I was like, well, I don't want to bother him, like,
Right.
and I kind of just gave up on lessons. Um, I think my friend Mark kept going to lessons. Um, and then he got better at guitar than me. And I kind of, but I'm also like young and like I've got other things going on too. I'm not just like focusing on guitar. I'm just 11-year-old kid having a good time. And yeah, just like kind of dabbled in it, but I wasn't really crazy about it. I was really starting to get into music and started buying CDs on my own from Columbia House, so I could get these mail order deals and stuff.
Yeah.
Um, and yeah, but I got into a lot of rock music from my friend Mark and I got into it, and I had a neighbor who would sneak me cassettes through the window, like because they had swear words on them. So like,
Right.
she would like, and she would specifically, her name was Faye, and she would specifically make these mixtapes of like the most swears possible in Guns N' Roses songs. Like these are the ones with the most swears. And I remember there's this one song called "Get in the Ring," which is just like littered with swear words. It's basically Axel like talking shit on like the media. And I memorized it. I memorized every word. I could still sing it today, which is ridiculous. And yeah, so that was my like fascination with music really kind of kicked off there. And then my brother started playing drums, or my dad bought him a drum kit, but then he kind of bailed on that. So I started playing the drums, and it was set up next to our stereo, which at the time we had cable radio, which was like a brand new thing. And I played to the blues station, which is just like dun 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 dun. It was perfect to learn how to play drums because you didn't feel like you were bad, and it was easy and
Right.
slow enough to keep track. And I started playing drums to that in the living room. And there's something about that I really liked. I really liked making big noise, and I really liked the rhythm and playing the drums. And that actually got me back into playing guitar more. I think I picked up both. So then I was playing guitar and I played drums, and um, yeah, I just kind of got into music that way. And then I remember going to my first concert without my parents at 13. We went with my friend, my
Nice.
my neighbor's older daughter, um, Alethea. She took me to see Live and PJ Harvey with my friend Mark.
Mm. Cool.
Yeah, and I remember Mark brought this like pipe he made literally out of like plumbing pipe. It was massive. I'm like, what is that? And he's like, it's to smoke marijuana. And I'm like, I don't think that's how you do it. And he's like, no, trust me, like this is how you do it. So I'm like, okay. So it's like weird, like coming of age time where like all of a sudden my friend has a complicated weed pipe made out of plumbing material.
Yeah.
We went to this concert, and oh man, he had to like hide it in his shoe, and he was walking with like a limp. And I'm like, this seems like a lot. Like, why do you care to have that? Like, we're going to the concert. Why do you need that?
Yeah.
So, anyways, we got in. He got in somehow with the pipe, and saw Live and PJ Harvey, and it was amazing. It was such a great rock show. PJ Harvey had this like pink latex full body suit on and high heels. I was just like, holy shit, she was awesome.
Yeah.
Um, and Live, Live was just the quintessential early 90s alt rock radio band. And but they put on such a great show and they were rocking, and I dug it. It was great, you know. But it was more that I was on my own experiencing this. I was like I
Right.
was with
Yeah.
friends, and my neighbor who was this kind of like, this, she was an older chick in our minds, where we're like, she's like way beyond us. Like we thought she was in college, but I think she was just like in late high school. And but she seemed like she was like showing us the ropes. Like this is how this is how you rock and roll. And we're like, cool. And
Yeah.
she had big hair and everything. And yeah, and then I just kind of did everything I could in music school or music classes. I loved. I was part of the choir. I was part of theater early on. Um, the first instrument I ever took was alto sax, and I hated it. I quit really quickly, but my mom said you have to take something because it's important.
Hmm.
She's like, it's important to play music. It's just good for you. That's which is like, it's funny that's like that was my first coaxing into music. Like it's just good for you.
Right.
You're just supposed
It's really good. Take
you're
it.
supposed to do it. And I'm like, this, I have to clear out the spit in this thing. It's fucking disgusting. This is not
Yeah.
fun. And I had a weird teacher. Um, yeah, and I just continued on and just became not obsessed. It wasn't an obsession. It was just a real joy to keep learning music and to try everything. I
Yeah.
wasn't like focused on just rock or just guitar. Like I played guitar, I played drums, I'd play some bass if somebody needed bass, and I was in a choir and I loved singing with other people and I loved singing classical music and I loved singing in different languages. And then I found theater and working with other people in theater. And, at first I was a tech in theater because no one really knew how to run a PA. And I learned how to run the lights and run the PA system. And then after being a part of, the theater tech team for 2 years, I became an actor and a singer and a dancer. And, I was in Greece. And then my senior year, I was the lead in the school play, which was Carousel. It's just not the most fun play. I wish we had a more fun play for my senior year, but it was a pretty big role for a lead. I had a 20-minute soliloquy in the middle of the play, which is just me on stage for 20 minutes singing. And
Wow.
yeah, I wish I had a recording of it. I'd be curious to see it,
I
but
wonder if it is out there.
someone has it on VHS. It's not on
Yeah.
YouTube.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
But all the while I was learning about punk rock and going to punk rock shows on the weekends. And then I had punk rock bands, and we were learning to, how to put on our own shows. Like our band was, early on, our bands were pretty terrible. No one would book us. So then, my bass player and I kind of always took the reins, and I learned that you could rent a fire hall for $200, and I could steal my dad's PA system for the night from him without telling him, because I was worried he would worry about what's happening with it. Because he
Right.
was like a folkie, and I'm doing punk rock and playing shows in a half pipe at a skate park, like.
Right. Yeah.
And I couldn't explain moshing to my parents. I couldn't explain slam dancing, and definitely didn't want them to come.
Right.
But yeah, I started learning how to book shows, and that created this idea that I could bring people together and that I could create value for myself. If my band sucked, at least I had the power to book my own show. And then
Yeah.
and then I met people, and then people wanted to work with me or wanted to trade shows because I know how to leverage point. And then eventually my bands got less shitty, and we got better at playing
Yeah.
music and got smarter, and um, made demos. And I remember I would get, scholarship money for doing classical stuff at school. There was a couple scholarships that were annual, and I won them a couple times, and it was like a couple of $1,000s, which was like way more money than I'd ever had for anything. And I'd spend it all on making my band's demo cassette. I'd go to a studio. We went to a studio, and it was below a jewelry shop next to a dance studio, a kid's dance studio in the basement. And we could only record during certain times because of, the businesses that were going on. But yeah, I put all my money into making cassettes. We didn't make records for a while, but um, that's what was happening. Cassettes were the easiest and cheapest to make, and they were still relevant back then.
Right.
And yeah, I started playing shows, started playing a couple shows out of state, early in high school. And I just found this whole other world of music. And then I was still doing music with school and doing theater and doing classical. And I was in all state chorus. So I was singing with like some of the best singers in all of the state and going to regional chorus. And all these things were just like, it was so much fun. It was like, I never liked just one thing. Like I wanted to be like, I wanted to enjoy all of it and take it all in because it all meant something different to me,
Yeah.
but it all gave me the same feeling. Um, and so I loved MTV. I loved, big bands on the radio. I loved, all the grunge stuff that was happening. Stone Temple Pilots, Alice in Chains, Soundgarden, Nine Inch Nails, all the stuff, Pearl Jam, all that early stuff that was happening was really exciting. And then I also liked the punk rock that nobody had heard of on the weekends. And these local bands would play, and then bands from New York City would come up and it'd be like, whoa, that's a big deal. And and then I liked having this world that only a certain amount of people knew about. Like it was nice to have this special place. And then I also had, I guess, what I envisioned as higher ed music, like choir and
Sure.
classical was, um, I just loved it all and it was really fun. And there was even a time where it all converged and I was singing an all state chorus. My parents drove me across the state to sing with this choir of all the best singers in the state that year. And I was in a tie and a suit and everything. And I literally had to have them drive me. As soon as I finished off stage, I pulled off the tie, pulled off the jacket, put on my hoodie, and my parents drove me across the state. And I literally ran on stage to sing in my hardcore band because I had booked this hardcore show on the same night. And I was like, I'm not canceling. I have to do this. And I went from one singing in a suit and tie to like screaming my guts out until my throat was bleeding
That's
um,
amazing.
at the show. And then yeah, and it was and all the while I was an athlete. I was like, I
Yeah.
was doing sports, and so I was a busy kid, and
I was going to say, you were doing a shit ton of stuff.
yeah. And I had friends that were straight edge and like, are you straight edge? I'm like, well, what does that mean? They're like, well, it means you don't drink, do drugs, or smoke. And I'm like, well, I guess I am. I don't do those things. It just didn't interest me. Like
Yeah.
I was like an athlete and I was busy. And the kids that partied and the kids that did that stuff in school, they were not cool. They were not people I wanted to hang out with.
Right.
They were the kids that made fun of me growing up. They were like the preppy
Sure.
kids. They were into Fish and Grateful Dead and, Dave Matthews Band. And
Yeah, I always had that. I was living in Virginia the first time I heard about straight edge, and it was in the music community, and it was like the hardcore and punk scene that was there, and like between Lynchburg and Richmond where I was living, and then going to shows. And I didn't do any of those things at that point, so everyone was like, "Oh, you got to be straight edge, right?" And I was like, "I mean, because I don't do those things, and does that mean I have to be? Do I have to define myself as that?"
yeah.
So I always thought that was a strange one too, when it was like, "Oh, you're straight edge," and I was like, "I'm not gonna get XXX tattooed on my body. I'll tell you that much." But I mean, I don't do those things yet,
Yeah, it
you
was
know.
about the same for me. I was just like, they labeled me. They're like, you're one of us. And I'm like, cool. I'm like,
Yeah, right.
I'm like, it felt cool to have a bunch of people that didn't care about that stuff. Um,
Yeah.
but I remember a couple times, I think I X'd up twice to go to shows with like my straight edge friends. And each time I did it, I was like, this is silly. Why are we doing this? And then it dawned on me. I'm like, we've got these huge Magnum markers in the car, just like putting these. I remember one time I did like, those X's that like the Red Baron has on his plane, the big old style
Yeah.
X's, or maybe the Iron Cross. I don't even know. It's probably not a good symbol, but probably has some association with Nazis or
Okay.
something. But
Something.
it
Yeah.
just looked like a big, artful X. And I was like, we're just getting high off this marker in the car, writing X's on your hands because it was like
Seriously.
those magnums are huge.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm like, the irony of this is not lost on me.
Yeah.
I just felt like it just wasn't for me. I just didn't care to show people about that. I was
Right.
like, those are my choices. I don't need to show anybody. And then I started learning about people who are militant or people who are hardline or people who are really not only strict about it, but judgmental of others about it. And I'm like, well, I don't care what
Yeah.
anyone else does. So I was
Yeah.
like, if that's going to lump me in with those, I'm out. And
Totally.
I ended up being quietly straight edge, and it was probably great for me for formative years of my life. I didn't party or drink, do drugs, and I just that I was like, I'm already an outcast from growing up here. I might as well just keep going.
Yeah, exactly.
So
Why stop now?
why stop now? But yeah, but I got really obsessed with shows. I was going to shows every weekend, and like people I went to school with had no idea where I was going or what I was doing. And they were partying in the woods somewhere in Connecticut, and I was going to New York City to see, some of my favorite bands, or going down to as far as like, I think we'd go down to close to DC. We'd go to Maryland and Delaware, and we'd go pretty far to go to shows, up to Syracuse, up to Maine. We'd go all over in New England. And I just loved shows. I just loved the energy, and it really was like an underground scene. Like there was barely any internet happening at that time.
Right.
There was like one New York City hardcore listing page, which was helpful because it would list shows sometimes, but shit was so unreliable back then. Like
Sure.
you'd
Yeah.
show up at shows and like there's nobody there and the place has been closed for months. And you're like, well, I guess it's not happening. Let's go get some
Oh
pizza
man.
and go home. It-
It's so funny to think about that nowadays when it's just like everything is so like bam, bam, bam. But then
yeah.
to in our lifetime have it be like, oh shit, no show tonight,
Yeah.
apparently.
It's so connected that, none of that would fall through the cracks now. But now,
Yeah.
back then, it was just like, I mean, even playing shows in a band were like, sometimes you had a first name and a phone number, and that's it. Sometimes you had just an
Right.
address and a first name, and that's it. Sometimes you're just like, just show up, and you're like, there wasn't any
All right.
questions. You're like, all right, on, I'll be there.
Yeah.
That
Cool.
was just
I'm
it.
in.
Yes, I
um,
really kind of just delved into all of that, late '90s punk rock, hardcore uh, scene stuff that was happening, and it was empowering. There's all these young people doing shit, young people making magazines, making art, making merchandise, making um, making all kinds of different groups. There was anti-racist action, there was veganism, but didn't know what veganism was. There was vegetarianism, there was even Krishna. There was like Krishna religious people in there, which it was always interesting to see all these things and have these things existing in this world, and people talked about them. Like these were other kids talking about religion, talking about you know animal rights and human rights and all kinds of different things, and we were doing it all on our own. And that was pretty cool. It was like, I
yeah.
don't think any of the kids I go to school with are talking about this or even thinking about it.
Right.
That became like a very special thing, on top of the music. Was like, this was a scene that was like a community, and a community of thinkers and people that are trying to do stuff. It was cool.
Yeah. Yeah. I remember when I was growing up, I was living in a very sheltered area, and my parents helped with that. And the little blips that I saw into punk rock, like I always think back into that, and I'm like, man, I was listening to all this stuff. I didn't necessarily have a scene that I was able to get into because like I think like Reliant K came and played in at a skate park in the town next to me, and that was like a massive deal, and like 10 kids showed up, and it was this shitty little half pipe that you could barely even skate. And but then like I found a radio station that played a punk rock hour at like 1 a.m. on Friday nights at the college radio station. And then that's when I started hearing like all these bands that weren't like in the Christian punk rock realm. And I was like, holy shit, man. And it was that freedom of like, okay, I'm hearing these things from these people that are saying one thing, and then I'm hearing this music that I'm loving, and they're standing for something, and they're doing, they're going for what they believe in. And it's stuff that I was like, yeah, I can go with that. Like it made sense to me, where like everything I was learning growing up, like in religion and with my parents, all that, I was just like, yeah, this makes way more sense
Yeah.
to me.
Yeah. And like, I just thought about too, like early on, we were doing canned food drives at like every show, like show is $5 or three if you bring two cans, like
Right, right.
we were, as a whole, we were just very thoughtful about the world outside the room that we were in together as much as the one that we were in, and that was cool. And that gave me a different perspective. And I learned a lot about injustice. I learned a lot about history and politics and things that I didn't know about because people were talking about them or questioning them in the scene that we were in or singing about them too. Like
Right.
I grew up with a band called Voices Fire, and like they were,
Oh yeah.
a very political band, and they made me look into the direction of a lot of different issues and things like that. And, and abuse and all kinds of stuff. And yeah, it was just really interesting growing up in that and playing in bands all the while, and then yes, I guess like the next thing I left high school and went to Berklee College of Music. I applied to one school. I was kind of like, didn't know what I wanted to do other than music. And I was like, well, I remember thinking if I can't get into the best music school, like I'm just not ready. I don't even know if it
Yeah.
was the best. It was just the only one that I could think of that was like catered more towards contemporary music or modern music. Basically, they accept rock and roll
Right.
other schools were great, but they were like strictly jazz, strictly classical, strictly theater. And I was like, I want to do that stuff, but I want to do other stuff too. And I want to be accepted as doing that stuff. So Berklee was like, Dream Theater came from there and all, Steve Vai and all these
Right.
all these rockers. And like, okay, let's go to Berklee. So I went to Berklee for voice. Because I really, as much as I liked the guitar, like singing was like my main thing, the thing I really wanted to do the most. And what I felt like I was best at. But I kind of went with like an open kind of major where I was just doing a little bit of songwriting, a little bit of music business, performance. And yeah, and I went to Berklee for a couple of years in Boston, and that got me into Boston and, going to shows up there and meeting friends and musicians up there, and which I ended up living there for 10 years after, being at Berklee. And yeah, it wasn't the best experience. It slowed me down as far as like I was just playing shows every weekend with my bands, and then I went to college and it all slowed down. It was studying music, and I was like, oh, I realized I went back to being a student, and I don't know if I was good at being that kind of student. I
Sure.
don't know
Yeah.
if I was like a little bit ADD vibe, or just couldn't focus on what was in front of me. And I was also starting to learn about my own natural depression that was starting to happen in the
Mm.
winters. I was getting seasonal affective disorder, and not knowing what that was, but just knowing something was changing in me. So I kind of struggled through college. I left after 2 years to tour in a band because I was like, you know, I remember my first music business class, the teacher says the average musician makes $6,000 a year. And I was like, I'm paying 120 for 4 years of school. Like
Jesus. Yeah.
that sounds insane. And growing up broke and not really understanding debt, not really understanding what these bills were going to mean for my life, I was pretty scared. I was pretty like, I don't know if I like this. I don't know if that's worth it. Like, why did anyone let me do this? It's like it sounded insane. And I'll
Right.
never forget that. The guy said the average musician makes $6,000 a year, and I'm like, this is terrible. Like I don't need the money, but I also don't need to spend 120 grand a year. Like so, or
Right.
not a year, for that degree in total. So I left after 2 years. I was miserable. I interned at a record label, Universal Music Group in New York City. Um, and that was after the summer where I biked across the country because my friend and I, we didn't have a car that would make it across the country. We both had, shitty beater cars. But I was like, I'm leaving college. I want to do a road trip. He's like, well, neither of us have a car that would make it to California or anywhere. So he was a biker in high school. Like he was like a competitive mountain biker. And I liked biking, but I wasn't really like super into it. But I was just like, we should try and bike across the country and maybe like make it a thing. Like I was early into making websites for my bands and stuff. So I'm like, maybe we make a website and maybe we raise some money for charity and we get people to donate and like help us pay for our way and pay for gear and we document it and this and that. This is before like, this is 2001 summer. So it's like, it wasn't much to go on as far as technology. We didn't have GoPros or anything. And
Right.
we barely had cell phones. I think I got a cell phone for that trip. And it didn't work out where we could really put it together and get funding. So we're just like, fuck it. So I just worked at a bike shop in Boston just so I can learn how to work on bikes, learn what gear I needed. And then I basically bought wholesale or stole whatever I needed to do the trip.
Yeah.
Sorry, bike shop. But you know, I sold enough stuff. I paid my keep there.
Right.
They were terrible to me anyways, so fuck them. But
Yeah. Fuck them.
I made it work, and I got bikes for us, and we outfitted them, and then we just hit the road and biked for 7 weeks across the country. It was like my life goes into two parts: before the bike trip and after the bike trip. And right after the bike trip was also 9/11, so it was kind of like a crazy
Damn.
shift
Yeah.
of everything in my life. Um, yeah, so
Yeah.
after that bike trip across the country, I was getting calls to be an intern in New York City at a record label, which was like, a big deal. It was a big deal to do that and to take that job. And I wasn't as big into major labels, the idea of a major label, but I wanted to take the job to learn what it looks like behind enemy lines. That's how I kind of viewed it. I was like, let's see how the monster works. Let's see how
Right.
the big record machine works, so I can learn and take it outside the machine. So that was my like goal, and I worked there, and I started September 10th of
Oh man.
2011 or 2001, and it was a very interesting experience. I was so excited, so full of energy. Got off at Grand Central because I had to drive an hour and 15 minutes to the train station and then take the train in for about another hour and then walk 15-25 minutes to get to my building. And I remember just being bright-eyed and bushy-tailed, like, this is great. I just biked across the country. I just, I'm here in New York. I'm doing it. I'm doing things. And then I go and I do the job all day, and it was great. And I met everybody, and I was like, this is exciting. And I remember walking back to Grand Central, and it just started pouring out of nowhere. Like, it was like just a flash thunderstorm, and nobody seemed prepared for it on the streets either. So nobody had umbrellas or anything. Everyone just scattered as I was entering Times Square walking. Everyone just scattered, ran inside buildings, were under awnings. And I was just like, I was in such a good mood. And I was like, I'm already wet. I got to catch my train. So I just kept walking. And I was just
Yeah.
the only person walking through Times Square. It felt like, just pouring rain, totally soaked, smile on my face. It was so peaceful. And I'd never seen Times Square so empty. It was
Wow.
just a very like beautiful moment. And then I got home and I called in for the next day. I was like, I'm going to come in Wednesday instead of Tuesday. I'm just gonna. I'm not getting paid. You said I can make my own schedule. I just decided I wanted to come in Wednesday instead of Tuesday. I think that's what it was. And then I woke up to my dad calling, and he's like, hey, the Empire State Building just got caught fire or something. I'm like, Dad, don't wake me up. Then he calls me again. He's like, oh, the Twin Towers are falling down. The plane hit the Twin Towers. I'm like, Dad. He's like, you need to look at this. And I turn on the TV and I see what was happening. And holy shit, planes had hit
Yeah.
the towers. When I was awake, the second plane had hit. No, the first plane had hit. And when I was up, I saw the second plane hit. And it was just devastating. It was just incredible to watch.
Yeah.
And I think that really fucked me up. Like just watching that, I remember just being like paralyzed, like sitting and watching TV all day, just being like, I can't believe this.
Sure.
And
I remember where I was, and I'd never even been to New York at that point. So, and I know how much I didn't even comprehend it. So
yeah,
to be there,
yeah, it was
I can't
wild.
even
It was
imagine.
wild. You know, I wouldn't have gotten hurt, but I would have gotten stuck there for sure. Because the cell phones were all jammed. My mom couldn't get in touch with me. Um, so actually, no, she didn't call because she was scared I was there. She was so afraid she didn't call me.
Oh, wow.
So my grandma called me and she's like, we're just calling to see if you're home. And I'm like, yeah, I didn't go in today. She's like, okay. So then my mom was at work. But yeah, that was intense and to say the least. And yeah, from there on, it was just like I left college. I had this internship. 9/11 happened, and it just put a weird damper on life and everything. Like it was very surreal. And I went back to work. Didn't go back to work immediately. I think I went back to work a week later. Um, and you could it was so surreal being there. Like there was a smell in the air that I'd never smelled before. And when you really start to think about it, you're like, I'm just breathing in bodies and building material and chemicals and whatever, you know.
Yeah.
It was like a weird, funky, basementy kind of smell. It was very weird. I ended up writing a song about that many years later because I never really sat down and tried to write about it. But I
Hmm.
wrote a song called "Breathing in Ghosts," and that's what that refers to, is literally
Wow.
breathing in dead people.
Huh.
It was just
Wow.
everybody in the streets were crying, and it was just so upsetting and ominous and very, very. It was like a movie. Like it was very surreal, and people were selling American flags in Times Square for hundreds of dollars, and people were buying them, and it was every day I'd come in on the train, and I was a young kid. I was partying at night or hanging out with friends late at night, so I'd sleep on the train. I get waken up by guys with guns ushering me through these secret tunnels because there was another bomb threat in Grand Central and I had to get out and go a different way. And it was so intense.
Yeah. Wow.
you know Going from like not seeing too many guns ever in my life to seeing serious guns every day, like a police state. Like it was just like military everywhere, cars getting searched. Our building would get evacuated, almost every other day because of bomb threats. Um, it was intense, and yeah, I mean, I could talk about that for a long time. It was just like such a. I wouldn't say I'm glad I experienced it, but I did experience it, and that became something that I carried with me.
Sure. Yeah.
For better or worse. Um, and it was weird to see how angry everyone else wasn't divided, and then people in New York were just focusing on each other,
Yeah.
and then everything on the news, and people were just it created a lot of hate and a lot of you know frustration.
Yeah.
Yeah,
That's the side I saw in Ohio.
yeah.
I saw the hatred and frustration building
Hmm.
there, So it's such a unique perspective from your side that I know a lot of people have, but I just haven't. I don't know if I've ever spoken to someone who was that closely involved before.
It was a beautiful moment of humanity, as sad as it was. I mean, like there were piles of flowers in front of fire stations that had lost most of their crew. Um, there were piles of flowers so high they couldn't even open the door. Um,
Jeez.
there were so many candles that it was literally just like crying wax into the streets and just pools of wax in the streets. And I had this, I'm an intern and nobody knows really what to do, but what we could do was try and offer some hope or some help or whatever we could. So I would box up all these CDs and swag and bring them to these firehouses to give to the families, to give to the kids, whatever we could do. Here's a bunch of free stuff. But it was like the hardest part of that job was going to every fire station around Manhattan and having to meet the captain and looking them in the
Mm,
eye and being like, this person just lost their whole family. Like some
right.
of these fire stations were like literally wiped out. And just to look in their eyes, to be 20 years old, 19 years old, and looking at these people in the eyes, and they were just so so gone, like in their eyes, they were just so riddled with sadness. And I'm like, hey man, like here's some free stuff for the families or whoever. Not even a thank you or anything. Guy like catatonic, most of them didn't have anything to say. They were just so fucking shook. And
Yeah.
it was a very, very rough time. And I was like, yay, I'm starting my music career life.
Yeah, right.
Like,
Oh man. What a time.
yeah. So from there, I was still playing in a band and doing some touring. And that's when I started playing in a metalcore band that started going down south. And we got into like we were playing a lot of shows with Christian bands and experienced what being a non-Christian band playing down in the south is like. People ask you, are
Oh
you
God.
Christian? And you say no, but like we're cool with Christians, and they'd leave. And you're like, man, we just drove 8 hours to play your fucking VFW hall, and you're gonna go outside.
Right.
Like, we're not satanic, we're not Satanists.
Yeah,
Like,
right.
if anything, we don't give a fuck about any of that shit. We're like, we're cool. Like,
Yeah.
like
It's so
it,
ridiculous.
that was very frustrating. I was like, wow, this is a real thing down here. If you aren't straight edge, if you aren't Christian, like people would judge you and not watch you or have problems with you. And I'm like, yo, we're just playing some fucking music. Like, that's it. We're just playing
Yeah.
music. Like, so that became a thing in the early 2000s for bands I was in. And yeah, eventually that band broke up and I made a solo EP. I was tired of relying on people. I was like, I need to take things into my own hands. A couple of bands had fallen apart, and I was like, fuck it, I'm going to do it all myself. So I made a solo EP and I played all the instruments on it. And I put it together and I recorded it. And I went out to LA and I was like, going to do the thing, go to LA and try and find a band or find music to do. And it was very much like a big move for me. I was 20 years old. And that was like a year after leaving college and going through 9/11 and all that. And I was in LA and I was living on my friend's couch. And I worked with I did a couple auditions. I've had some really weird auditions. And then I found myself singing, doing a demo for this group that was called the Apex Theory. And they were like right on the
Hmm.
coattails of System of a Down. They were an Armenian rock band. They were really cool and they had really technical music. And at that point, I'm like, I really liked technical rock music that could still write hit songs, still write radio stuff, still be accessible,
Yeah.
but the music was smart. Yeah, and I demoed with them for a while. And I really thought it was going to lead to something and ended up not leading to anything. I wasn't the right vibe they were looking for. And then I was just out of money, out of time, couldn't get work after 9/11. And I had to go home. I sold all the things I could sell besides my car to stay in LA. And then I had to go home. So I came home and it felt like a big failure, even though like people are like, no, it's not a big failure. And I'm like, yeah, I know, but it feels like one.
Right.
So after that, I went back to Boston, got a job at the college I was working at because it was easy to get a job and I just needed something. I was doing carpentry at home with my dad, and I'm like, I'm not staying home and doing this. This is terrible. So I took the gig, went back to Boston, and then started my life there, which led me to playing in bands and playing with friends, and then eventually finding a band called Therefore I Am, and I joined them. And my brother was in a band that was signed to Epitaph, and we had a little scene for a few years there, which was really special and cool. And I did a lot of touring in that band, and I got to use all the tools and all the things I'd learned over the years, booking and communicating and putting out records and making merch and all the tricks and techniques I learned. I got to put them all to use in this one band after a couple of years of not knowing, where I was going to go. Like I was auditioning for bands, but not finding the right thing. And so that band took me on the Warped Tour. It took me, around the United States a bunch of times, in Canada, and we even went to Australia. And then after that ended, I went solo again, or solo for real. This time I was playing more acoustic music. The first time was like I was still focusing on rock, and I wanted to take things into my own hands again and my own creativity and really go and do that thing. So I played solo for the last 10 years, and that led me to working on the Vans Warped Tour through my friendships and connections there. And I started working industry jobs because I realized I looked like shit on paper. Like I was just could not get regular jobs to save my life because I had all these spotty jobs and spotty time differences throughout my young career.
Yeah.
So I looked like a flight risk, and I looked like someone
Right.
who wasn't focused. But really, I had all these skills. They were just only applicable to a certain industry. So I started kind of honing that and applying for jobs in the industry and production jobs and learning things that could help me use the skills that I already had in a place that would appreciate them. so so I became a worker. I was like, I'm going to work in music and be a musician. I'm going to dovetail all those, skills. And that led me to working all kinds of jobs. My crew guys on the crew I'm on now, they joke like I've worked every job possible. Like I literally have a story for so many jobs, and it's because I've had to survive for years being a musician and filling in gaps and just working to make ends meet. And you know, I'm always open to try stuff, always open to learn, and then that led me to you know taking a bunch of jobs that were pretty rough on the road. And I was just like, you know what? I got some home gigs. I don't need to be out on the road. I've been touring all my life since I was a teenager. I was like, I don't need to be on the road. I like it, but I either want to have good jobs with friends or I want to have really high end jobs. I'm shooting for higher money. I'm pushing myself to learn more and to go to higher levels. Otherwise, I want to stay home. I like home.
Right.
And that was a
Yeah.
good
Yeah.
feel. That was a good feeling. I didn't feel like I needed to escape or be away from home. And it was just at that moment that across my plate came the Billie Eilish gig when she was just starting out. And it was a manager friend who had known me from years of playing with his bands. And then I had booked some of his bands on my stage on the Warped Tour, which I produced. I produced this all acoustic stage on Warped Tour for 4 years. And we had this relationship from just being in music for a long time. And he asked me if I knew someone who would be able to tour manage a 15-year-old pop singer who tours with their parents. And I was like, that sounds awful, but I'll try and find you somebody.
Right. Yeah.
So to me, I'd never toured with family. I'd never toured with a teenage girl. I'd never toured with pop. So I was like, my preconceived notions of what pop music was like, nah, it doesn't sound like it's for me. But I listened to the music and I saw that she had a full sold out tour. I was like, that's really interesting. And at the time I was like, I felt a little out of touch. I was like, I don't know how people are breaking nowadays in pop music. Like some people are YouTubers, some people are,
Right.
finding their way through alternative means other than, the typical MTV music videos, radio. So I wasn't sure where this landed or who these people were, these young people that were into her, because it just wasn't my scene and it wasn't not my demographic or my people. So,
Totally. Yeah.
but I listened to it and I met the family. And after I met the family, I was like, you know what? Like they're good people and this sounds interesting. And if nothing else, it's something new and taking me in a different direction. And I said, I didn't want to keep working unless I was pushing myself or trying to do different stuff. And so I said, sure. I worked it out with the manager and gave it a shot. And the rest, as they say, is history. Because
Yeah.
after that, we had stuck together from being in a van together to now we're headlining festivals around the world, and she's doing arena tours. And up until the pandemic hit, we were, ready to go on a full world tour in arenas. And
Yeah.
that was just, I've been with her since October of 2017, which isn't that long ago. Um, for
That is crazy when you actually put a number on it,
Oh yeah,
how far she's come along.
yeah, little over
I'm
little
sure
over
even more
three
to you.
years. Yeah, it's wild. So
Crazy.
yeah, and that's where I'm at now. And here I am talking to you. We're both off the road. Um,
Yeah, man.
and yeah, I don't know. I've never had to tell my young story that much. I felt like I was making notes for a book. I was just like, oh, I'm gonna go
I
all
was
over.
gonna
I'm gonna
say
go
that's a
all over the
good
place.
those are good footnotes, man. I like it. And it's cool. It's cool to hear the journey from, you as a child having this place to explore, and then I feel like you in those, learning that as a kid and having that freedom, it just made you want to do what you do, go explore. Like you said, you have a story for every job, and I feel like because you had those moments as a young kid, it opened your mind so much to that of like, ooh, there's mystery. Like, sure, I'll try it. I'll see it. What? Why not? Why would I not try it?
I also did magic early in my life. I loved magic.
Wow, that's
I used
amazing.
to put on magic shows for my family, and I loved illusions and tricks. And to be real romantic about it, I think that's what my love of music was. It was like this magic happening where you're
Sure,
moving air molecules and it's giving you feelings, and you're making other
it is
people and
amazing.
you're giving other people feelings, and everybody in a room is having feelings together. And like the energy and the magic of music was like, huh, it was really just something about it was just always real special to me. So that's why I like it's not genre specific for me. It's like it's where the energy is and
Yeah,
the magic is like that's where I wanted to be.
yeah, I can feel that. Um, so kind of on that same in the same vein. I always like to ask people if obviously COVID aside and restrictions aside, if I came to you and I had a plane ticket to anywhere in the world, where are you gonna go?
Iceland.
Have you been yet?
I haven't been yet. Um,
I need to redo on Iceland. I was a heavy drinker at that point still, but I had a good time.
I,
I enjoyed it.
I remember
But you would love it. It's
I
gorgeous.
remember someone told me if you live in Iceland, you have two jobs to afford to live in Iceland. If you live in Iceland and you drink in Iceland, you have three jobs.
It's so true, dude.
Yeah,
It was incredibly expensive.
yeah.
And what I found was I think out of anywhere in the world that I've been, that the English that is spoken there is the most beautiful and like phonetically correct all the way across the board. It is just like you couldn't tell me. And then they start speaking their language and it is like so different.
Mm.
And it's just amazing how good of English speakers that they are.
I've always wanted to go there. I just haven't yet. Um,
Yeah.
Kind of one of those places where I want the perfect trip, and I think that's what prevents me from ever going there. It's like I haven't been able to schedule the perfect trip or afford the perfect
Sure.
trip. So
I could see a perfect trip being a bike trip across Iceland.
did I tell you about that?
I think we talked about it at the fire. It
Yeah.
always we're going back to fires, one of our fires, many
Yeah.
fires.
Um, I had looked into it before the pandemic hit. I was like, you know what? I feel like I need a getaway, maybe something solo. Um, and I'd biked across country. I had biked 1,200 miles for a tour I did, 5 years ago. I was like, I need another big, big adventure and maybe a solo one. And I started looking and mapping out biking around Iceland. And basically, if you take the ring road around the entire island, you can bulldoze through it in 3 weeks. And I was like, I don't know if I have 3 weeks with my schedule right now. But so
Right.
starting mapping out like 1 to 2 week bike trips. And then I learned about the terrain and I learned how sketchy it can be for certain kind of bikes. So you have to really gear up and then you have to
Mm.
be ready for terrible weather. Um, but I started looking into it and I actually had some ideas and I started mapping it out, and then the pandemic hit and it all went to
Right.
shit. Like most things
Oh
this
shit.
year, last
Yeah, of course.
last year. Yeah,
Um
that's where I'd go.
so on that note, on your I know you could probably talk about it for another 10 hours too. Your trip across the country. Give me like I'll say like a person that you met that stuck out to you or a story or both that, just one that's just fucking bonkers.
On the bike trip or just in general?
The bike
The
trip.
bike trip. Oh boy, so many characters on the bike trip. I should let you read my journal. Yeah,
I would
you'd,
love that.
yeah, you would love that. By the end of it, I can't even hold the pen because my hands are so cramped from holding my bike. So
Oh my God, I'm
I'm
sure.
just like, fuck this. Uh, uh, uh.
Yeah. Oh, fuck
Yeah.
you.
It starts like beautiful, like multiple pages. This is such a journey, blah, blah, blah. Then it's just like, fuck this shit. Can't even hold
Yeah.
the goddamn pen anymore because my hands are fucked up.
Yeah.
Um, there was one guy who really stuck out. We are somewhere, I think, in Wisconsin, and my buddy that I was biking cross country with, Jay and I, we were eating at a diner somewhere, and we saw this guy carrying a cross on his back on the road, and it was a big wooden cross, all very, very much like Jesus Christ, hauling a cross around. And I was like, that's fucking interesting. Like, what's that guy doing? We're kind of in the middle of nowhere, and it was kind of open air. It wasn't like it was kind of like a real dry, hilly area. Nothing really around. So I'm like, I don't know where this guy's coming from or where he's going. But
Right.
he also had little wheels on the back of his cross, and he had like a flag, like a caution flag on the back of it too. So um, yeah, we saw him and they're like, oh, that's fucking interesting. And then we got on our bikes and went on our way, and we caught up with them, and we stopped to see him. And we're like, hey man, like, how's it going? And he goes, I'm spreading the word of God. And we're like, oh, are you now?
Mm.
And he just had this wild-eyed look, and he's like, I've been carrying this cross from St. Louis to here to there, spreading the word of God. And we're like, right on, man. We're biking across the country. Nothing. And he's just like he just said a couple more, couple more things, some scripture stuff, and then he gave us pamphlets, and we're like, all right, man, well, see you later. We took off.
Yeah.
And like I think it was like yeah, it was like later that day or something. I forget what it was. Or maybe we took a day off to like refresh or whatever, but we ended up catching up with him again. And like this car full of ladies with bonnets on, had stopped and were talking to this guy. And we pulled up again and we're like, oh, there's our buddy, like Cross Guy. I didn't know his name, Cross Guy. And we stop out, like, hey man, and he goes, oh, spreading the word of God. And we're like, yep, you are. And the ladies are like, isn't he amazing? And we're like, yeah. They're like, did you come to see him? I'm like, no, we're biking across America right now. And they're like, and they turn and go back to Cross Guy. And I'm like, and they were like, they
Wow.
had these bonnets on. They were like the Mother Mary
Oh yeah.
of something society, and they had these bonnets for a special reason, and they were talking about it, and it was just they were like fan girling out over Cross Guy. Literally, they were surrounding him and like so excited, and I'm like, and this guy is just like his body's a mess and this and that. And my friend who's with me, he's like, does he know that like Jesus, like, he like brought the cross, so that's where he was gonna be killed? Like, does he know how it ends? It
Yeah. The whole symbol of it is odd to me.
was very
It's
weird.
like it's like that you want to remember that part of Jesus
Right,
is what
right.
he got nailed, like got
Yeah.
horrifically killed. But okay.
Like this
I don't
guy's
know.
body was so fucked up from hauling this thing around. Like,
Oh my God, I bet.
and yeah, it was just funny how like we thought we were doing something amazing. Nope, they didn't give a shit. And this guy was just,
Yeah.
oh man.
Good
Well, okay,
Lord.
well, I'll give you another one that you'll appreciate because you just love characters. This guy,
Oh yeah.
his name was Orville Wilson. Orville Wilson.
Strong name.
We were hitchhiking somewhere in North Dakota. We'd had shit luck. The wind was at our faces, like so bad that we literally couldn't pedal. Our bikes were too heavy with all the shit we had on. We had such a strong headwind. We didn't get the mileage we needed down. There was nowhere to camp. And we're like, fuck, we got to keep going until we find somewhere to camp. Like, there was farmland, but it was all like ripped up and like thorny, and there was just no trees, no nothing. It was like, it was terrible. We're just like, so we started biking at night, and there was a big full moon, and we're like, this is amazing, it's bright, nice full moon, this is great. This is like, it was so hot too because we were biking in the summer, and we're like, this is a biker's dream, just biking by moonlight. It's cool out. We could get some miles down at night when there's not a lot of traffic or anything. And then we just started seeing headlights ahead of us, in the distance. And then the headlights would disappear and come back and kind of meander all over the place. We're like, what the hell is going on down there? What we realized quickly was that it was people drinking and driving and just bulldozing themselves into cornfields with their trucks and
Oof.
coming out and then coming back on the road and then going into the cornfields and doing donuts and coming back. And we're like, cool, we're going to get killed by drunk drivers biking by moonlight in North Dakota. Fuck our lives. So we're just like,
yeah, it's romantic.
Yeah. So we're just like, that's it. We got to get out of here. We got to hitchhike. This is not safe. We're like, we're calling it. We weren't purists, we didn't have to bike every mile across country. We're like, we got nothing to prove. We're still doing a crazy thing anyways. Yeah. So we stuck our thumbs out, and this trucker stopped, and he put our bikes in the back of his truck, and his name was Orville Wilson, and got in his cab of his truck, and never been in a cab of a truck. And Jay was in the back, and Jay fell asleep, and this guy was just talking my ear off. And he started to tell me how he's a big fan of tow trucks, and he says, grab that folder right above your head. And I grabbed this huge binder like this big. He goes, open that up. And I start opening it, and there's just pictures of tow trucks, all tow trucks. Keep flipping the pages, more and more tow trucks, all kinds of tow trucks, different tow trucks. He would tell me about every one too. He'd be like, this one, this one's for wreckers that need to pick up, ambulances. And this one's for Lake Michigan. They put the pads out so they can pull cars out of the lake when they fall through the ice, and all. Wow. Like, way too much information about tow trucks, more than I ever want to know in my life. Yeah. I was like, this guy's saving our ass. I have to humor him and just listen. And then after a while, he starts talking about his family and this and that. And then he just starts going into this whole thing about how he thought about killing himself and this and that. And I'm just like, all right, so we're with suicidal trucker guy who collects pictures of tow trucks. Not feeling great about our future right now. Like he was just starting to get real dark. And I'm like, I'm 20 years old, and I'm just like,
that's a lot.
Yeah, it's a lot. I'm like, don't do it. You have something to live for, I think. I don't know.
I mean, think of all these tow trucks, man.
What about all the tow trucks? It was insane. But like, there are so many characters we met across the country on that trip. It was
yeah. And how long was the trip?
7 weeks.
About 7 weeks.
Yeah,
I can imagine you met an unbelievable amount of people. I love that.
Yeah.
Man, tow truck and cross guy. I love that.
Mm-hmm. It was funny because from Connecticut until Ohio, people were like, what are you doing? We're like, oh, we're biking across America. Like, wow, that's amazing. Good for you. Cool. Right on. After Pennsylvania, people saw us and they're like, what are you doing? We're like, we're biking across the country. And they're like, why? They weren't amazed. They weren't impressed. If anything, they were like, why would you do that?
Right. I mean, I will say growing up in that region, the first region that you talked about, I'm not shocked. Because it's that like, why would you do that? Like, why would I not do that? But that's weird.
Yeah.
No, it's not. That's crazy. Why would you? Yeah, I can see that just like a very unimpressed blank face being like, why? What made you want to do that? Why? Like, not even that. They wouldn't even care about that. Yeah. Just that's ridiculous. I think it's amazing. I remember when I heard that you told me that for the first time, and I was just thinking, holy shit, that's amazing. That's so cool.
It's a fun one to pull out for conversation because it is such a crazy thing. Like but there's something that always drew me to doing those kind of things, like I don't know if I'm an adrenaline junkie, so to speak, but like just doing an epic thing, just doing something that's beyond myself and what I think my limitations are.
Yeah.
And that's why doing it 5 years ago on the bike tour I did, I grew up in New England. I grew up and, going to shows in New York City and traveling there and stuff. I never thought in my life that I would bike from Brooklyn into Manhattan, into the Bronx, um, through Harlem, and then straight into the woods up to Poughkeepsie.
Yeah.
Bike with
It's
a
so cool
trailer
too.
and a guitar on it, like
So
like
good.
to me, like biking across America is one thing, but like biking through New York City successfully, to me, it was just like, wow, that's amazing that that's even possible, because I also
Yeah.
grew up when New York City was not a nice place in the early 90s. When
Sure.
I went there for the first time when I was like 13, and I was like, oh, this place is rough. Like
Yeah, I bet.
it was kind of a tougher place back then. So to be able to bike on actual bike paths too, like most of New York is really great to bike on. You would never think it,
Sure. Yeah.
but they did.
Yeah.
I tip my hat to, I think it was Bloomberg who actually did that. He
Hmm.
set up all the bike paths in the city and the
That's
state,
amazing.
and the rails to trails programs. They took old railroad tracks and turned them into bike paths around the country. And there's
Yes.
actually,
Which was so cool that we got to go on one of those.
yeah, I think they're working on a cross country bike path right now that connects a bunch of existing paths. It's not going to be
Wow.
finished
That's
for
amazing.
years, but it's
Sure.
in the
It's
works.
still cool that I mean just planning that. Holy shit.
Yeah,
That's so much. It's funny you said reading your journal on that trip because after we left Idaho, if you read my journal after I met you, there were many, many mentions of riding or doing something going across country. Because I also met a guy who Lindsay knows who ran across the country. This
yeah,
was later on in our trip, but I had the anticipation of meeting him, and then you told me about that. So I just started to get this this fascination with it because I'm kind of the same. I would say adrenaline junkie, or I like extremes, which is again like why drinking was a terrible thing for me, is because I
sure.
take everything to an extreme. And yeah, the second I heard about that, I was like, I think Brian and I are gonna do that one day. I think I wrote that quite a few times in my mind. I was like, yeah, that's happening. Brian and I totally gonna maybe Iceland. That would be super hip.
Yeah,
I would totally do that because I'm not a biker, but I'm also again the same type where I'd be like, I can fucking do this, and we'll fucking do it.
yeah.
I'm in.
Oh yeah,
Um, all right, I got two questions for you,
hit me.
and then yeah, I'll let you get back to your day. Um, what would you want the world to know about you, Brian Marquis?
What would I want the world to know about me? Hmm. I think just to know me. I think just to be seen for the things I do and the things I appreciate, and the love that I bring to my family and friends and the things I do. I think that's it.
Yeah, I like that, and I mean, you bring a lot of love to my life, man. So I
Aw.
appreciate that, and I can feel that from you. And lastly, what? Oh, if you had the ear of everybody in the world, what would you say to them?
If I had the ear of everyone in the world, I would say be kind to each other, and everybody wants to party.
Yeah,
I think that's it.
that's perfect. I love it. I love it, man. I agree with that. I think it's a good sentiment to give out to everybody.
Good things to make you think of.
Yes. Well, all right, dude. I appreciate your time, man. It's been super fun
Yeah,
hanging as always, but it's cool. What I love these conversations. I get to hear so much more about my friends and then
sure.
people I don't know, but it's super fun to talk to you and yeah, appreciate your time, brother.
Yeah, I appreciate you being in my life, and I love that you guys came up and saw us in Idaho, and we got to start this friendship. It's a
Yeah,
beautiful
man.
thing.
It's so beautiful, man.
It's
I
so
love you, man.
beautiful. What is printed behind you on that?
Kind of looks like a ball sack
I was
pattern.
gonna say it looked like a ball sack.
It's funny.
It's not at all.
It's not, but I like having it right like that because
Yeah,
some people pick up on it and they're like, "Is that a ball sack behind your head?" And I'm like, "No, it's actually pretty nice
yeah.
seeing
You're like,
that
no.
this little
You're like, you're
yeah,
disgusting.
it just looks like I have some testes resting on my shoulder."
I love that this is the conclusion of the podcast.
Perfect. Yeah, it's
You
perfect.
got
Testicles on the
you got
shoulder.
nuts on your shoulder, kid.
Nuts. You got nuts. You're nuts and you got nuts on your shoulder, kid.
Oh boy, we did it. Love you,
We
man.
did it.
Thanks for having
Love
me.
you too, brother. All right. See you,
I'll
man.
see you soon.
Bye.
Peace.
Thank you for listening to the Beautifully Human podcast. To hear more beautiful stories from beautiful humans, follow us on Spotify and rate and subscribe to us on Apple Podcasts. Follow us on Instagram at Wanderlust Moon Duo. Peace signs up.